It had been a quiet evening in the Williams household, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that usually signaled peace. It was the kind of silence that settled like a weight in the room, thick and suffocating, as the glow of screens lit up the faces of each family member. Maggie Williams, a woman in her early 40s with auburn hair streaked with grey, stood in the kitchen, staring out the window. The last few months had been an unrelenting blur of busy schedules, distant conversations, and endless phone notifications. Her husband, Paul, a software developer, was hunched over his laptop at the dining table, his fingers dancing across the keys without pause. Their teenage son, Jake, sat on the couch, absorbed in his phone, his thumbs scrolling through an endless feed of social media. Lily, their 10-year-old daughter, sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes fixed on a tablet as she flicked through YouTube videos. The silence wasn't the comfortable kind of quiet that came after a shared meal or a day well spent together. It was the kind of quiet that signaled emotional distance, the kind that made Maggie wonder when they'd stopped talking to each other. She hadn't noticed it at first, the slow creep of digital devices replacing face-to-face communication. At first, it was just Paul working long hours from home, trying to meet deadlines. Jake had always been glued to his phone, but he'd once been more involved in family activities, playing games, talking about his day. Lily had always been obsessed with her screen, but recently, it seemed to occupy every waking moment. Maggie had been patient, understanding the demands of their lives in the digital age. But now, the loneliness she felt in her own home was palpable. She missed their conversations, the moments where they shared experiences and laughter, not just a string of texts or social media updates. She cleared her throat, a subtle attempt to draw attention to herself, but it fell flat. No one noticed. Paul was too engrossed in a work email, Jake was deep into his Twitter feed, and Lily's face was bathed in the blue light from her tablet screen. Maggie took a deep breath and walked over to the table, setting down the glass of water she had just filled. "Paul," she began gently, "how about we eat dinner together tonight? Like, really together. No phones, no laptops, just the four of us." Paul looked up, his face a mask of confusion. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and paused for a moment before responding. "I'm just finishing something up. It'll only be another half hour, Maggie. You know how it is." His eyes flickered back to the screen, dismissing her request without fully acknowledging it. She sighed and turned to Jake, who was still absorbed in his phone. "Jake, honey, can you put the phone down for a few minutes? We're trying to have a family dinner here." Jake glanced up, barely meeting her gaze. "I'm just catching up on some stuff, Mom. I'll be done soon." Lily, hearing her name, perked up. "Can we watch a movie while we eat? I don't want to talk." Her voice was flat, as though the idea of interacting with the family was a chore. Maggie's heart sank. She had tried. But all her efforts seemed to bounce off the walls of their disconnection. It was as though each person in the family was in their own world, tethered only by the shared roof above them. That night, after dinner, Maggie sat in bed, scrolling through social media on her own phone, the irony not lost on her. She had long ago accepted the fact that technology was a part of their lives, a tool to help them navigate the modern world. But tonight, it felt like a silent monster that had grown too big to control. It was too late now. She couldn't go back to a time before this creeping digital divide. But maybe, just maybe, she could try to fix it. The next morning, Maggie stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee in her hand, her mind racing. It had been a restless night, her thoughts spinning around what had gone wrong with their family. She had been so focused on everything else, work, errands, school schedules, that she'd forgotten to notice how distant they'd become. She set the cup down and walked into the living room, where Jake was sprawled on the couch, headphones in, immersed in a game on his phone. Paul was in the kitchen, reading the news on his tablet, while Lily was glued to her tablet screen, muttering softly to herself. All right, Maggie said, her voice firm but calm, I need to talk to all of you. The family looked up, a collective sense of mild annoyance in their expressions. Maggie stood tall, drawing their attention. I've been thinking, she began, about how we're all living our lives right now. And I don't like it. We're all so caught up in our screens that we're missing each other. We don't talk anymore. We don't spend time together anymore. We're just existing in the same space, but we're not really here. Paul raised an eyebrow. Maggie, you're overreacting. We're just busy. I don't think I'm overreacting, Maggie said, her voice softer now. I think we're disconnected, and it's starting to show. I've seen it in the way we talk, or don't talk, to each other. The way we all retreat into our devices rather than engaging with each other. So, here's the deal. She paused for a moment, waiting for them to give her their full attention. I'm proposing we do a digital detox. A full week, no devices. No phones, no tablets, no laptops, nothing. We'll spend that time together, in real life. Talking. Playing games. Doing whatever we can to reconnect. Jake scoffed. A week? Mom, that's impossible. How are we supposed to survive without our phones? I'll miss out on everything. Lily chimed in, but what about my YouTube videos? I can't not watch them for a whole week. Paul sighed. Maggie, I don't think you realize how important technology is for work these days. This idea might be a bit extreme. But Maggie held her ground, her voice unwavering. It's not extreme, it's necessary. We can't keep going like this. I miss you all. I miss us. The room fell silent. It was a long, uncomfortable silence, but finally, Paul set down his tablet and spoke. All right, fine. A week. But if it's a disaster, we go back to our screens. Deal? Maggie smiled, relief flooding through her. Deal. The week started off rocky. At first, they were all restless, constantly checking their pockets for phantom notifications, twitching with anxiety at the thought of being offline. The first evening, Maggie had suggested they play a board game. The awkwardness was palpable, but slowly, over the next few days, the walls began to come down. They started talking, really talking, about their days, their fears, their hopes. Jake, who had been so wrapped up in his phone, revealed that he had been feeling overwhelmed with schoolwork and pressures from his friends. Lily, usually absorbed in her digital world, opened up about her struggles to fit in at school and how she sometimes felt invisible. Paul admitted that he felt disconnected from his family and that he was often too tired to engage after long workdays. They discovered things about each other that they hadn't known in years. They laughed together in ways they hadn't in so long. The days felt longer, not because of the absence of technology, but because they were actually present. By the end of the week, their family dynamic had shifted. They weren't perfect, but they were closer, more connected, and more intentional about how they used technology in their lives. It had taken that forced unplugging to recognize the value of their relationships, and they all agreed that they would continue setting boundaries with their devices, prioritizing real conversations and face-to-face interactions. Maggie stood in the living room, watching her family engage in a conversation, no screens in sight. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was a start. And for the first time in months, she felt the warmth of connection. The kind that wasn't mediated by pixels.